Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's edition, or today's edition, or even yesterday's edition, depending on which country you're in, of the Presence Posse Presents. I don't know what time it is in Australia, but it's late. It's tomorrow. Welcome to today's topic, which is presence and emptiness. And emptiness is so many different things. So let's get to it. Who am I going to go with first? Or who wants to say something right away? Today, I've got Jan Hart and Bobby Cobb and Danielle McMahon. With me, I'm Miriam Siegel. We're 4 of the 6 of us that are in the Presence Posse. And we all have something to say about, well, pretty much everything presence.
And nothing. Miriam, I think you should start this evening because you had a lovely piece about this earlier.
Oh, thank you. Okay. Sorry, it just sounded like somebody came in the door and I'm the only one home. So that was a bit freaky. Speaking of emptiness, oh no, I have a house ghost. Presence and emptiness. Emptiness, I'm going to go 2 ways with this. First, just to start us off, the emptiness that I can feel, that immediately when I start thinking about it, I think of something in connection with grief or shock or meaninglessness in life. I feel empty, unfulfilled. Life, doesn't have meaning. That's one kind of emptiness. And another kind of emptiness, which I would put on the other end of the scale, which is the openness of awareness, which is an emptiness of awareness, which is presence. And the first one, would often be associated with pain, some sort of discomfort, and some sort of wish to not be in emptiness, not feel the emptiness, and want to fill it with something like friends, alcohol, gambling, smoking, drugs, whatever, sex. The other is full. It has everything in a moment in it. So it doesn't feel, well, it feels and doesn't feel, but it definitely isn't painful. So how's that for a start? Y'all asked.
Yeah. Say a little more about the perspectives piece.
The perspectives piece. What do you mean by that?
Well, you had, when you wrote your piece about this, you spoke about perspective.
Well, actually, I did, and for those of you who don't know, and I maybe haven't had a quick peek at the Presence Posse Facebook group, I just put a short blip in there about presence and emptiness and used a picture from music notes, like a piece of music. And there was a rest in it. There was notes, and then there was a rest, and then there were more notes. So a rest is an empty space where there's no music. It's silent. Silent.
Sound of silence.
Yes. And the point of the picture was that the emptiness is only a measure of time. It is not all time. So that feeling of emptiness is not always, it's not your whole life. It's not the entire picture. Whether it's the emptiness of presence, which actually in my experience is full, or the emptiness that we feel when we feel empty, as in feeling, numb even. It's the numbness, the emptiness is a short measure of time. And as far as perspective goes, I mean, that's 2 perspectives of emptiness, presence, and numbness, for example. Then there's the perspective of, what is this feeling of emptiness trying to tell me? What is in the emptiness? Are there thoughts behind the emptiness? Is there another emotion behind the emptiness? Is there a wanting? Is there a drive to do something with the emptiness. All of that is different perspectives on emptiness. So, do I see the emptiness as an opportunity to learn something about myself and my world and what I'm doing with my world? That's a perspective. That's an opportunity. Or do I see it as telling me something about my real life in the way that I believe my feelings are true? So if I feel empty, my life must be empty. That's a perspective. And there's the possibility of being present to all of those experiences. And then there's the possibility of being open and aware. And those experiences are then recognized as just experience. Did that help?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Okay, have at it, you three. Who wants to start?
I will.
Yes, Danielle, yay.
I had a very similar reaction to the little blurb when I read it, that initially emptiness seemed attractive to me. Like I'm looking for spaciousness in my life, and it's almost like a drive towards energetic decluttering. Right, like cleaning up my office space, except I'm cleaning up my energetic space. I want to have that spaciousness for experiences to move in and move out and not get stuck, and not, just to be open and aware. Right, like I don't know that I guess I don't feel that spaciousness as often as I would like to. But it seemed like an attractive thing to have, that openness, emptiness, for something to come in, something exciting, something new. And then I had a memory of when I was just graduating from college and I broke up with my boyfriend. And I remember describing it like somebody poured Drano in me.
Ooh.
Right? Like there was just this emptiness. And it clearly was a grief, but I knew that it was what needed to happen. I just felt empty and alone, and like I didn't know how to connect with what was next. So that didn't seem particularly attractive. I didn't want that kind of emptiness and spaciousness. I don't want someone that I am comfortable with and in a loving relationship with to just disappear so that I have spaciousness. That wouldn't be my first choice of experiencing emptiness.
Yes, because there's that as well, isn't there? And I mean, we can get into the nuances of it. And thank you very much, Danielle, for bringing in that perspective. That's wonderful. And you are now a grandmother, and even those who aren't and have children at home, and then the children move away, or there's some sort of birthday party and tons of noise and lots of things going on, and then everybody leaves, and then it's quiet. And that can feel really, really empty, going from wah to.
Yeah.
And a lot of people will do something, turn on the TV or the radio, put music on, do something to fill the emptiness instead of allowing themselves to transition over into the quiet and become comfortable with that. So it's not quite the same thing as what you're talking about. There is the emptiness of loss, where there was someone there and then there's not someone there, in an extreme way. However, there is that same sort of sense of there was something, now there isn't. And there's an emptiness or a feeling of emptiness connected to that, I think.
Yeah, and in full-time parenting and a child growing up, I think there is a loss of a role. And if you've become over-identified with that role, then you feel it as a loss of self. Like that.
And that can feel really empty.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't know who I am anymore.
the big struggle, the big empty nest syndrome, right? Is that you've become identified with that because you've done it for such a long period of your life, and now you don't know who you are, and so right, you want to fill that up rather than wait and see, what shows up for you next. And for me, that wasn't a terribly difficult transition. It was almost harder for me to go from having been single up until the time I was 30-ish, and then having 3 children and a husband. Like that's what my marriage experience looked like. Going from single to mother of 3 with a husband.
Instant family.
Yeah, so going from the quiet into the noise and the drama and that was a more difficult transition for me than going into what's next after raising my children.
Yeah.
More fun for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it was fun initially. I mean, eventually, but not initially. Initially, it was quite overwhelming.
I can imagine. I can imagine. I'm acquainted with people who have been monks for a number of years, and that transition from the quiet and the solitude into a life with a lot of people, and maybe even finding a partner or a wife, can be very disconcerting. It's almost like being used to empty in a certain respect, and then having too much full.
Well, it's interesting because they say it's easy to be present when you're sitting alone on the top of the mountain, but when you start making your way down the mountain and start meeting other human beings again, being present is a whole other story. So it
It's
doesn't
more
even have to be,
complicated.
the extreme. Yeah, yeah. But and it's so intriguing because I'm sure all of us in our work, meet with people that either like or don't like emptiness for lots of different reasons. Like just today, I was working with somebody who had a really big insight and a realization, and she fell out of her thinking. Her mind just went poof, essentially, and she found herself in this bliss state of emptiness and presence. And while she loved it, it completely freaked her out. And people find emptiness from all sorts of experiences that they might think are good or bad. But when we're not used to emptiness, it can be a hard place to be, no matter how you find yourself there. And yet, if you have the courage to be there, there's so much treasure in that emptiness. As you were saying, it's so full. And presence is the doorway to access that treasure. You often hear people saying, I have a hole inside me and I'm trying to fill it, that empty hole. And if we can resist the compulsion and the pull to go to the drugs, the alcohol, the food, the shopping, the exercise, whatever it is, and just be and allow it and, hold ourselves in curiosity and care and compassion and just see what happens. It's very transformative in my experience, my own personal experience, and I guess in working with others. But so this emptiness, there's a whole spectrum, and maybe more than one. Yeah, from all the different perspectives that have already been brought up here tonight. My son is moving out on Friday, and we're doing a happy dance. We can't wait for an empty house. Not to keep it empty, but so we'll have room to fill it up with visitors again. So yeah, emptiness comes in all sorts of shapes and sizes and experiences, and just presence is such a beautiful way if you find yourself faced with emptiness and it's unwelcome, staying present in your heart, I find can soften the experience and help us remain open to it. And a focus on the heart space can interrupt what's going on in the head space and allow us to stay a little longer.
You bring up really good. I mean, we come back to this so often, and I love that you brought that in, Jan, because presence is a practice. So if emptiness is an experience you have that feels uncomfortable, every time you manage to bring your presence and curiosity to that moment, and you manage one more second, you're improving. Right? It's a skill. It's a practice. And sometimes we have bad days and sometimes we have way better days. And I mean, few of us suddenly have boom and we can do everything. Presence. The majority of us, I would wager to say, have to work at it. Work at it. We train like we train at the gym or So as Jan was mentioning, it's like it might feel uncomfortable and the impulse to put something in it. If you can bring your heart and your presence and your curiosity to it and just notice, that's my magic word, notice what's going on and keep noticing and keep practicing noticing. All of a sudden, you've had a long stretch of emptiness and not felt discomfort.
Yeah. And, breathing is a great way to help us stay with it as well, breathing into the heart. And, there's whatever works, there's lots of different things. But yeah, and it is a practice and it's a use it or lose it muscle. I find if I stop practicing for any period of time, then I've slipped. There's what happened, that atrophy.
And when you guys say that you are practicing presence, how does that show up for you, and what is kind of the process by which you are practicing the presence? Because I almost see it as a different way. When we introduce this topic, I'm like, oh, this is going to be so beautiful. And just in thinking about it, I didn't even myself process the quote unquote dark side of emptiness, if I'll introduce that term. But at hearing you guys talk about it, I think that most people, like if you were to say, how's my life? How's your life? And they were to respond back, oh, I feel so empty inside. That's not going to be anything that anybody is conditioned to celebrate. But I looked at it and to me, the emptiness is like the goal of transcending the story and transcending the experience. And when I hear you guys talk about practicing presence and training presence, I'm processing it almost in the opposite way, that the emptiness is the default. And this is just me processing this. And the conditioning is that's bad. Like I can think of when I was a financial advisor and my boss would want to come look at my schedule. And he wanted to see a very, very full schedule. And I bought into the conditioning. I kept it very full. And I can remember, clients cancel, and often at the last minute when you don't really have time to fill it with anything. And it would just be like, 90 minutes of nothing. And it was like a present of presence that I now have the opportunity to fill it in. And it would be like at work, particularly, it would just be these little small gaps that I could think, oh, I've been wanting to research this stock and now I've got an opportunity to dig deep, and I have an excuse because, you know, if the boss comes around and goes, "Cobb, what are you doing?" And I'm like, "Well, I had an appointment at 2, but they canceled. So, you know, I'm just doing a little research for my next appointment that I have coming up at 4 or whatever." And but I feel the opposite, that I'm being pulled. Like if I have nothing planned for the day, I just feel like the conditioning's like, well, what are you going to do? You got to do something. How are you going to be productive? What are you going to make the most of this? And I feel almost like it's more of a letting go than a trying to hang on to. And when I'm hearing us talk about practicing presence and working out and being in the presence gym, it sounds like the mirror image opposite reverse of that to me. So I'm curious how that hits you guys.
I think that's gorgeous, Bobby, what you just described. You know, I guess for me, I guess I meet a lot of people that aren't familiar with presence, or the feeling of presence. So that's where the practice comes in. And a lot of times when emptiness arises, it's unwanted and unwelcome. So, you know, the processing for me in that scenario is, well, what's here for me? You know, is to ask a question. You know, what's here for me? And if I ask that question and get curious and listen deeply, then I'll fall into presence. So it's just a way of kind of trying to melt the resistance, I guess, and create some allowing in somebody that just doesn't like the emptiness and isn't used to it. But I agree with you wholeheartedly. Presence is something that arises naturally from deep within us when we're not preoccupied and distracted by what's going on up here. You know, it's there all the time. Presence, here, now, always.
Yeah. I've heard. Oh, go ahead.
I was just saying, and we can take ourselves away from it. The other thing that kind of struck me when you were speaking is you're very practiced at presence. You're very familiar with presence, and you're very comfortable with presence. You know, as are the Presence Posse. So any opportunity that we get, what's here for me is a chance for presence, a chance to let it arise, a chance to let go of what I thought I had to do and just be here now. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's what kind of came up for me.
Can I jump in here for a moment, Bobby?
Just please.
When I hear the two of you talking, there's something I think it's helpful to mention, because I'm thinking about people who aren't used to staying in emptiness and who may experience emptiness as discomfort rather than a place to land or a starting point even. Like I was thinking actually before that now after having done this for a long time, and I teach people, I train people in mindfulness and presence, and I actually have a class called Trauma and Presence. So there's the inability to stay empty, put it that way, because there's so much chaos going on in our minds, for example, or we're hypervigilant and looking around. And my general state of being is quiet, is very sort of peaceful and empty. And then noticing when something happens and I'm feeling not quiet, like not empty in a positive way, right? If grief comes in, or if hurry or worry or something comes in, and noticing what happens with that. So there's like starting out not being easily able to be empty, to becoming able. And there's an important point that I wanted to make with that, and that is that not everybody knows they have a choice. Whatever shows up, whether it's discomfort empty or presence empty, there's a choice as to what you focus on, where you put your awareness. I can identify with the chaos, or I can identify with the emptiness that is discomfort, or I can identify with, or actually let all identification go and just be present to the space that is emptiness, that is full. And until you have some experience with that, you don't really know what I'm talking about. So that was the encouragement, is to allow yourself 1 second at a time, if that's what you can manage, to feel the emptiness, which isn't empty. Please go ahead, Bobby. I just wanted to bring that point.
Well, that was a good point. So that kind of gave me a little bit more clarity around that as well. I can't remember if it was Danielle or Miriam, may have been all three of you at one point, that talked about the discomfort of the emptiness happens when we identify, or perhaps over identify, with a specific role, and we were allowing that role to fill us up and make us feel complete. And then when that role disappears, now all of a sudden we feel an uncomfortable emptiness. And it's like an uncomfortable void. And I almost feel like we're talking about emptiness on two levels. There's the emptiness when something is supposed to be here and it's not. And there's the emptiness that is the atmosphere inside of which all the storms and all the beautiful days and all the beautiful sunrises and sunsets and the lovely breezes and all of that takes place. And we have, and that's kind of how I think of awareness, as that big wide open space inside of which everything is occurring. And as you said, Miriam, we have a choice. And one of those choices is, do we want to identify with the content of what we are creating inside of the space, or do we want to identify with the space inside of which the content is created?
Beautiful. That's kind of what I was thinking, and I wanted to put it in a sort of simple way. We've mentioned on a few of the Posse talks Pema Chodron's quote of "You are the sky, everything else, it's just the weather." So if you're going to identify with anything at all, identify with the sky.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, the clouds will go by and the storms will happen. And I mean, it's going to happen. Life is going to happen. And it's kind of the way it is. But we don't have to become the storm. We don't have to become the chaos. We don't have to become the sunshine. We can just be the sky and allow, to use that word, everything else to happen without us being taken out of the emptiness, which is a beautiful place to be.
Mm-hmm.
I love being the sky.
Me
it's
too.
wonderful being the sky.
Me
It's
too.
fascinating being the storm, but I love being the sky.
The best perspective of all.
Danielle, you want to add anything here? You don't have to,
I
but if you
want
want
to
to.
ask Bobby, since he asked the question of how we practice presence, if he practices and how that looks.
I do. I like the formal part of my practice. I meditate every day. I teach a meditation class. I help other people learn to meditate. So that's a very formal practice. And I think you can turn anything into a practice. There's an interesting book. I don't know if any of you guys have read it. It was written a long time ago. It's called The Way of the Pilgrim. and it comes from, I think, Russian Orthodox Catholicism, maybe. I'm not sure. It's been a while since I've read it, but in that book, there is a Bible verse where I think in one of the letters of John to somebody, I don't remember who, I'm sorry, he talks about praying ceaselessly.
Mhm.
And this one pilgrim's like, well, what do they mean by that? And so he went on an exploration, and he began to practice this idea of praying ceaselessly. And in the book, he was praying, Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me, or something like that, just over and over again. That became like a mantra for doing that. And I think life can be like that, and the practice can become merely, am I identifying myself as the space, as the emptiness, or am I identifying my space as the content? And I at least I do. I go back and forth between those all the time. And the little game that I play with myself is when I notice that I'm getting caught up. And so that would be if I'm getting angry or frustrated or anxious or bored or anything that we would consider to be a negative emotion. And I use the air quotes because I kind of feel like no emotion is inherently positive or negative. It's not good or bad. All of that's contained within the picture. But those angry feelings, now, when they arise with me, they serve as a pattern interrupt, meaning that, I'm playing these unconscious patterns over in my head. I'm projecting where this is likely to go, and I'm resisting that, the divine unfolding of life. So that just creates a pause going, okay, what's going on here? I'm getting pissed. Why am I getting pissed? And what part of me is getting pissed? And what is it that I want to have occur that's not occurring? And is it important that it occurs in that way? And that just kind of serves as a little bit of a reflection to go, all right, just pause for a second, and what's going on here? And I don't know how much of it is the human experience or if it's just my experience, but somehow from my childhood rearing and my early influence, I got very addicted to action and achievement and setting and reaching goals. And I became good at it. I'm a good goal setter. I know the methodology, and I got to where I was very uncomfortable with doing nothing. And actually, it was the process of learning how to meditate and sitting down and just seeing, wow, this was pretty cool. And at first, I liked it because it allowed me to do the other stuff even better. So it was like in my life, it was like pulling into, like I'm driving a Formula One racer, and every once in a while, you need to pull into the pits and get new tires and get new fuel and get new oil and do everything that you need to do mechanically so that the car can be constantly racing at peak performance. And I was using the meditation for that. And then, there's just been shifts along the way. And for me, it's been a letting go of that need. I still have all of those skills, and I call on them every once in a while. And it's like putting on an old baseball glove that I had nicely broken in. It's like, oh, I remember this. This feels good. Wow, it's still limber.
Yeah.
And so now going back to that is kind of cool. But to the degree I think that life can become for us a pathway within presence and that we can stay present, it just gives us a whole different perspective on the way things are showing up and how other people are showing up. And, on the one hand, it seems like it changes almost nothing. And from another perspective, it changes absolutely everything. And so I had a thing recently that I was that I needed to do with the government. I had a form that I needed to file, and I was not filing it. And it wasn't hard to file. I just could not get myself to do it. And for several weeks in a row, like every day, I would have this battle. Okay, today's the day that you got to do it. Just sit down and do it. And I'm trying to force myself, and I'm just watching myself. I'm like, I'm manufacturing these excuses of why I can't do it now. And it was like, on the one hand, I'm doing it, and I'm like, I can't do it today. I got to do this. This is more urgent. I'll do it later today, and then eventually, I'll just do it tomorrow. And first thing tomorrow, I'm gonna do it. And I kept putting it off and putting it off and putting it off, I'm sitting there, sitting with myself in contemplation, going, why can't I do this? What is going on? And I finally did do it. And through a series of hysterical mistakes, what I could have gotten in trouble for delaying doing it turned out to be the exact right day when I went on February the 23rd. And that, as it turned out, was the perfect day to go and do that. And this error that I could have been not really charged with, because I wasn't committing a crime, but I was just late. It didn't look like I was late at all. It looked like the government office had screwed up. And the moment that I recognized that, I'm like, oh, let's see how this plays out. And then it became a game. And I just kind of started playing along with the game. And there was a moment in there that I could see that I was going to win this little game that I was playing. And suddenly, man, I was just like all in. And I don't have an explanation for that. I mean, it would be, but it was weird and wild and fun. And in the rear view mirror now, it's kind of like watching a divine intervention on a very small scale unfolding. And now I could make up a story about it, and that I was connected to this energy in the universe, and maybe I was, but just it was fascinating watching my resistance to it, fascinating watching it unfold as it did. And it was wonderful being a participant in the experience as it was unfolding. And, so.
Very cool.
Yeah.
I'm going to jump in with a couple of points, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
I have very similar experiences as far as not acting on something. And sometimes, and the interesting thing is when that happens, I think generally speaking, a lot of us will be, oh, you're weak, and why should I should be doing this, and I should have gotten this done already, and what is the problem, and blah, blah, blah. We use sort of to beat ourselves up. But it can actually be that when we feel like we're like when we procrastinate or put something off, that it is some inner intuition telling us to wait. And we're not recognizing that that's what it is. Because I've had happen so many times where I've waited, and when I actually act on it, it was like, well, it's a good thing I didn't do this earlier.
Mhm.
Because whatever it was, that particular moment it worked. If I'd have done it the day before, whatever, it would have gone completely differently. So sometimes there's an inner intuition to wait, and we don't recognize that that's what it is. And then we start blaming ourselves for being too weak or inconsistent or whatever. And when we
And
get
that
into
can
more
be
in
another
tune,
form of emptiness.
beg pardon?
So that's another form of emptiness. We're empty
Yes.
of inspiration. We're empty of energy to get on with these things.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. It can make it worse by judging it as something other than what it is.
Yeah.
And if I can just add this, you know where it's not okay? If somebody else is expecting you to do something and you come back to them and say, you know what, wisdom is telling me just to wait on this.
Well, if that's true, though.
If it's true, but from the point of view of the other person, and you're likely to get a response back, well, wisdom should be telling you you're going to get fired if you don't get this done today, or
Yes.
some version of that, or just a sarcastic maybe Bobby can do that. Well, okay, but let's go check in with Bobby's wisdom and see if Bobby's wisdom telling me he just needs to sit on his ass today. And so there is conditioning. And that was hard for me. Like, we do. Sometimes we'll flip a coin, and if it's heads, it's yes. If it's tails, it's no.
Yeah.
And then if we get the tails and realize, oh, we wish it was heads. Okay, boom, that's the answer. But there's not a side of the coin that says, just wait. You don't have all of the information that you need yet. Sit back and see how it unfolds. And more with the conditioning, because going and telling somebody else, and when somebody tells me that, I can remember the first time somebody told me that. They're like, wow, okay, that's interesting. And you know what? I'm just going to need to sit with that a little bit and see what comes up for me. And I'm like, wow, you can do that? I mean, it was like, let me show you a better way to cook rice. I didn't know that was.
Well, you know what, though, Bobby? I mean, in flipping a coin, yeah, there are two sides to every coin, is the expression. But there's the flipping it up in the air part. And we tend to forget about that. In order to know what side of the coin is going to land, it has to be in the air for a moment. And there's emptiness in that before it comes down and we get our answer. So there's that sort of being with the emptiness without waiting or expecting or putting something into it, and just because we don't do that, do we? Well, many people do, actually, when I think of it. We flip a coin and people are like, oh, and they're already thinking about what the end result will be.
Yeah.
Right. But presence, no, is it going big? So the idea of presence is just knowing that I don't know. I can't know 100% until it lands.
Yeah.
So there's no point in me doing anything with that space except allowing it to be space or being with the space. So I just wanted to mention that. We forget there's more.
Lands on the shelf and it rolls away. Leaves you empty of an answer.
Yes, exactly. I just wanted to bring up another thing, like rewinding to something you were talking about as far as the emptiness and then getting angry. Like my thought was making myself angry, right? I make myself angry. I start thinking thoughts and I may not be aware of them or interpretations or judgments, whatever I'm doing it. I'm making myself angry. And for people who maybe aren't used to noticing that, it's like if you are uncomfortable with emptiness and space and quiet, it is not unnatural. Or if you're used to chaos, if you're used to having a busy brain, you'll start filling the quiet with something. it's just a way to calm your nervous system down or give yourself something familiar, because the nervous system likes familiarity. So, for example, making myself angry, making myself sad, cultivating some kind of discomfort. Like, why did I just suddenly start thinking about that problem as I'm sitting in quiet? Well, it could be that I'm not dealing with the quiet so well. I might want to look at that. So I just thought I'd mention that when you're practicing, anybody out there who is considering doing this, when you're practicing becoming acclimated, accustomed to emptiness and spaciousness, just notice when something arises, like anger, like nervousness, fear, sadness, the urge, the impulses we spoke of earlier, the impulse to eat or the impulse to go watch television or whatever it is. Notice it and get curious about what's that about and why is that showing up right now? Like, why am I putting that in there? Because it's not, I mean, if there isn't anything happening around you, then you're bringing that up somehow. So why? And there's a wealth of information in there. Or you can let it go and not allow yourself to be taken into whatever and come back to the presence, come back to the space. Go, Bobby.
I love that. And
thank you.
I want to dig even a little bit deeper with one little phrase, and I just want to pull off it a little bit. You say, if nothing is going on around you, then it's a good question to ask what's going on the inside. Can we expand that? And I very much believe that we are conditioned to feel like our feelings are telling us about our external circumstances. They're telling us about our life. So often when we introduce the idea of self-inquiry, of going within, people take offense to that. and they feel the need to reinforce their story and share their story and share it in such a compelling way that they can get me to go, oh, okay, well, you're right. Your life is truly screwed up and you should feel the way that you do. Anybody would. And I don't do that. You know, I'm very gentle in the way that I assist them in their self-inquiry, but I'll start asking, well, can you think of a time when all of this was going on and you still felt calm, peace inside? So I wonder if we just expand that definition to say it's always something that is going on inside of us. Our tendency is to blame the circumstances, which is just a conditioned reaction. It's something that we've been practicing all of our lives, and everybody around us has been practicing all of their lives. So it looks like it is the normal thing to do, to blame your external circumstances. And we're really saying, don't look outside, look within. And within is, it's a dark place, so it can be scary. It's a place that many people have never looked before. So the first couple of times it's new and they're very tentative about it. And it requires us to take responsibility for how we're feeling because we're causing it. So it is both. It can be, depending on your perception, very imprisoning and very limiting, and you can feel like you got a straitjacket on, or like emptiness, it can be the absolute freest expression of pure potential, pure possibility. And the realization, Fred's not here, so I'll quote Jesus. Fred's always our Jewish partner who's always quoting Jesus. Jesus told us, don't look over there or over there for heaven. The kingdom of heaven is within. And, so accepting that invitation to look within, which I think that's the invitation that we offer every week in a different way, to go inside for that exploration. And the emptiness can be a void where nothing is happening and nothing's occurring, or it can be the field of all possibilities where anything can occur and often does.
I'm going to jump in there for a second, because as soon as I said it, I thought they're going to misunderstand.
Okay.
And that's my own
On cue.
No, it was perfect though, because that is a brilliant point to bring up, right? And as soon as I said it, I thought, okay, you really should explain. And even so, like the qualifier for me, I'm thinking about this. Generally speaking, like if I'm sitting on my couch and children are making a lot of noise and throwing things and whatever and being kids, I don't have to identify with that, be taken out of my space and my quiet. I can if they're actually bleeding, right? So my point would be, but even then I don't have to. So my thought is, it's not unusual for me to work with people who have had quite extreme experiences. So my point would be, okay, if you actually are being beaten, I do bring this up in some talks, if you're actually being beaten by someone or you are in a physically threatening situation, sitting and meditating in spaciousness is not necessarily an appropriate action. You might actually be in freeze or hypotonia, right? Which is not going to save your life necessarily. So it was more that sort of, as long as nothing life-threatening is going on, it's possible to meet everything with space, in space. And you can also, in a life-threatening situation, be in space. And it's possible to act on a life-threatening situation from the space. Even moving quickly can be done from space. Well, that just sounded like from space, but I mean, from the spaciousness. It's not always easy, but it can be done. Absolutely. The natural thing for many of us to do is, if somebody's chasing you with a weapon, is to get the hell out of there. And that's not easy to be spacious around. So, but I'm really glad you brought up the point, because I mean, calamity around me doesn't necessarily mean that I need to react to it, get involved in it at all. And this will often happen when people get involved in other people's arguments. Have you ever noticed that? Somebody else is having it, right? And somebody else, or I or someone, gets involved. And it's like, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? I'm the sky. I'm the sky. And even in the middle of my own argument, I'm the sky. I don't have to actually be doing this. I don't have to be arguing at all. I can be the space and allow whatever unfolds to unfold. So I'm really happy you brought that up, because there are those distinctions and the choices that we have as we become accustomed to being in the space. That's Siri getting in on the...
As she does.
Yes. Sorry about that. Yeah. Go ahead.
I was just commenting on Siri, as she does.
Okay. I saw Danielle put her mic on, so I was thinking,
oh, okay.
Danielle has something to say.
Yeah. So I feel like the practice of presence is in opposition to our conditioning.
Aha.
Right? Like that's where, when I said originally, like I'm pulled to that as an energetic decluttering, it's kind of a getting rid of all of that conditioning, where it is okay not to be doing, not to be going. We are not human doings. We are human beings, but we are not conditioned to be human beings. We're still called that, but we're not encouraged to be that, to be. We're encouraged to do, to accomplish, right? Like all of those thoughts, we're encouraged to judge our emotions. our situation, our, all of that is, to me, it's an energetic clutter. Those thoughts that don't arise from within us, but from conditioning, from automatic responses, right? Like, I feel lonely. That's a bad thing. Like, those things happen so quickly within us that until we start to practice presence in some formal way, and I think there is that needing to interrupt the pattern. And I feel like there has to be some formal practice of mindfulness or presence or something to begin to interrupt those patterns and to be able to sit in presence. And then, yes, to be able to take that formal practice and actually put it into your everyday life, right? Come down the mountain and interact with people and begin to maintain that sky presence, right? Where we don't get drawn into the storm, and we don't get drawn into other people's arguments, and we don't get drawn into their drama because we choose not to. Because now we have a choice. Before we knew that we were reacting from conditioning, we didn't have a choice. Like, we have to get to the point where we can make a choice. Do we want to feel this emptiness? And if we do, can we? Right? Like, we might have to practice a while to be able to actually begin to experience that as a comfortable place, as a place of a field of possibilities. When Bobby said that, I was like, oh, that's the fullness that Miriam was talking about, that Jan alluded to as well. Yes, it's empty and it's full because it's the field of all possibility. Yeah, but it's not the field of conditioned responses.
How beautiful is that?
It's just gorgeous.
Gorgeous. I actually think that that's a good place to round off. That was a beautiful way to end this talk.
Gorgeous.
So, as we come to the end of our talk, it is the hour. Is there anyone who has anything they'd like to mention, an offer you have, a course that you're offering, anything about yourself before we finish today?
I'll go with two things. One is people who are listening to this podcast, wherever you happen to be listening into it. We are formally publishing our podcasts now. We've been doing this. I need to do a quick count because I know we're coming up on 100. And so as we get closer to that, maybe we can have a little virtual celebration of our 100th podcast. And so any place where you get podcasts, Spotify, Audible, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, our Presence Posse podcast should be there. Second thing is, if you want to dive a little bit deeper, I am going to be offering an exploration in this. And Miriam and Jan had asked about it a couple of weeks ago. I was talking about the Golden Lotus meditation, which is a really cool meditation. I had a lot of conversations. And it's interesting, after you guys asked me about that, I think it was 2 weeks ago, and I said I'd had one person. And I was kind of like, well, I guess nobody's interested in that. And you guys said, oh, well, I'd like to do it. I'll be along for the ride. All of a sudden, it was like the floodgates opened. And that is a cool, unique thing. But based on the conversations that I'm having, I sort of feel like a deeper dive leading up to that is what's needed. So I'm going to begin that exploration later this month. I'm tentatively, although I haven't seen where this falls on the calendar, thinking about first day of spring, which would be March the 21st, although I don't know where that falls. So I need to double check that real quick. But an exploration of the divine I am and inviting more and more presence into your life Some of it will be philosophical, some of it will be experiential, and some of it will be prescriptive. I'll give you some practices to do to interrupt the conditioning, because I think presence is our natural state, and conditioning is keeping us from ever getting anywhere near it. And that if we can settle things down and recognize our conditioning and interrupt some of our conditioning patterns, which aren't bad. The goal of every new thing, I'm attempting to learn snowboarding. It's very much a work in progress. But my goal is to be able to snowboard down the mountain completely integrated, completely conditioned, knowing what to do and everything. So, being able to turn something over to effortlessness is the goal of conditioning. And it's pulling us away from the natural effortlessness that is within inside of us. So we'll explore that duality and see if we can turn it into a non-dual experience.
Love
Both
it.
present.
Love it, love it, love it. Thank you, Bobby. Jan, do you have anything you want to share?
Nothing in particular, but that was gorgeous, Bobby. Look forward to it.
Thank you. Me too.
And the podcast.
Danielle?
Yeah, I don't have any course offerings or anything right now, but people are always welcome to reach out to me. And probably the best way to do that is on Facebook Messenger. I'm not great about email.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you. I have an online course that is a 12-week course, and I call it Undefiable. And that is the goal when you finish the course, that you will be more undefiable. So it's becoming undefiable. And if you are curious about that course, you can take it you have a choice between two different ways. You can take it as a self-study, or you can take it as a supportive self-study. The supportive self-study has more hours with me. And the self-study is just 2 question and answer sessions, and the rest of it you can do on your own by following the modules. And if you're curious about that, you can contact me at my email address that is at the bottom of this page. Check out the website for more information about the course called Undefiable. So, first of all, I would like to thank the Presence Posse, Jan Hart, Bobby Cobb, Danielle, and myself, Miriam Siegel, for this rousing talk on presence and emptiness. And I would like to thank all of you who joined us to watch and who shared your comments and your likes and hearts. And we welcome you to be with us next week, next Monday, same time, same place, for another rousing talk on presence and something or other. And we'll let you know in our free Facebook group called The Presence Posse. So thanks again, everyone, and we'll see you next week. Take good care.
Bye, Rosalie.
Bye, Rosalie.